Okay, so I said I would make a video on the devastating news today that there has been yet another migrant boat tragedy in the Mediterranean. This one may be the worst yet. There are reports as many as 700 people may have drowned today off the coast of Lampedusa in Italy. Um, that means in the last week alone, including this tragedy, there's been over 1,000 people drowned. That includes the big one last a few days ago, 400 people perished, and one just on top of that, 41 perished, and this 700 perished. This is becoming an absolute humanitarian crisis. That is quite obvious. And if this trend continues this year, it's going to be even deadlier than last year. Apparently, it's got to the point now where this season is being called the Mediterranean killing season, because the number of deaths are so high and the journey is so perilous. One thing I'll say is that it is obvious there are no easy answers to this. Um, and I think that you would have to be a pretty cold-hearted person not to feel some compassion for the people that are going through this. It is absolute hell. Um, One issue that has been brought up is the European Union search and rescue program, which was scaled back. That was criticised by human rights groups. The principle of it was that if there was less of an effort to save people, it would deter them from making this perilous trip. Now, obviously, that hasn't worked because migrants are still taking this desperate approach. So the approach is sort of we're not going to care that much, so don't come, hasn't worked. So that's obvious. So from a humanitarian perspective, I think that needs to be expanded. But it's also true that we cannot just have a never-ending situation whereby people are coming in their thousands to Europe and there's no sort of controls. This needs to be a two-pronged approach. There needs to be an absolute thorough analysis of how this problem can be solved from the source. Um, and my concern is if it's just dealt with at Calais, then that's just the tip of the iceberg. This needs to be dealt with at the source. And of course, these people are coming from conflict zones like Libya, like Yemen, stability in Iraq, Egypt, Gaza. So each situation is not exactly the same, and there's complex approaches in terms of dealing with those conflicts. I do think that one approach that could be at least one measure to deal with this would be very harsh penalties for people traffickers. And this is a difficult thing because a lot of them are themselves not exactly privileged people. A lot of them are teenagers who are desperate for money, but what they are doing is despicable. And I do think there needs to be serious measures against them, partly as a deterrent. Um, there has been calls to copy the Australian approach, which is a very hardline approach. But from what I understand, again, that hasn't done anything to deter people making that trip over to try and get to Australia. There's been different political reactions. In Italy, Matteo Renzi has called for an emergency summit, whereas Berlusconi's party Forza Italia has called for boats to be sank. The understanding behind that, as callous as it sounds, is to put people off making the voyage. But I just think that that would be an absolute immoral thing to do, to sink a boat with desperate people. It's whatever you think of immigration, that has to be. I think that deprives us of any humanity whatsoever. Um, I saw someone on my last video, and I'm not going to give this scumbag attention by naming him, but let's just say he had a Katie Hopkins style attitude to this, and he said, "Oh, I'm a realist." Now, there's this idea that if you have any compassion on this issue, you're a left winger, you're loony left, you're neoliberal. Actually, conservatives have also said there needs to be a compassionate approach. I think any level headed adult human being would see that there needs to be some compassion involved in how we deal with this. Yes, there needs to be a practical approach as well. Yes, it can't be highly based on sentiments. There needs to be some tough decisions made. But in the end of the day, these are men, women, and children just like us. but who happen to be experiencing a very different life. They're going through something that most of us can't imagine. And they're always on these overcrowded boats. I mean, when is this thing going to end? How many tragedies are we going to see? Um, I believe there might be several approaches. There's no easy answer. But firstly, for the immediate term, because this is a humanitarian crisis, I believe search and rescue needs to be expanded again. It was a mistake to take that away. I understand the reason the EU done it, but it was a mistake on moral grounds to take that away. So it needs to be expanded again to ease the pressure from the Italian and Maltese authorities. Because at the moment, there are villages in Italy that are trying their best. They're trying to be decent people. They're trying to help these migrants, but they're bearing the brunt of this pressure. This is a European problem. So it's down to all European countries to take a stake in dealing with this. Um, it also comes down to the governments that are involved. Now, in the case of Libya, I squarely blame the warring parties because if they would just put aside their differences for one day, for 1 week, if they could have a temporary ceasefire, maybe they could ease this pressure and maybe they could limit the number of people who are fleeing for their lives. So definitely some of the blame must lie in the governments that are warmongering and that are involved as warring parties because they're fueling the conflicts that are making this humanitarian crisis possible. I know there's an argument that Western intervention in Libya exacerbated this problem. That's a position that UKIP has. Well, that might be true, but I think it's wrong to just make a simple blanket statement of, oh, Western intervention caused this problem. Because if you look back in 2011, the choice that Western countries had was either do something or stand by and watch Gaddafi commit genocide. That's the reality. I know Farage and his party likes to spin it like, oh, this was, he takes a sort of isolation approach of, oh, let's just do nothing. There's terrible things in the world, but it's none of our business. I don't share that approach. I think there are times where difficult decisions are necessary. Now, it may well be that that didn't help in terms of creating the situation as it is in Libya, but the primary blame for the situation in Libya has to lie with the warring parties. Um, and the truth is, with all of these conflicts, there are no simple answers, but there needs to be some sort of practical approaches to dealing with this problem. I don't agree with sinking the boats, not just on moral grounds, which I think would be reprehensible, but actually on practical grounds, because it hasn't worked before. The hardline approach that the EU took before did not work. We still see hundreds of these people trying to make these perilous journeys across. There is a perception that when they get to Europe, it will be easy. They could just come from Italy to Calais. So maybe there does need to be some restrictions on the Italian side. I don't know enough about what the Italian authorities are doing, but at the same time, I don't think it's fair to put all the pressure on Italy and Malta, and those countries are facing enormous pressure right now. Um, so let me know your thoughts. There are absolutely no easy answers to this, and it is an absolute tragedy what's happening. I will say one thing though, whatever your opinion is, any callous, cold-blooded statement saying "let them die" or Katie Hopkins is right or anything like that, I'm going to delete. Not on my channel, not on this video. Um, I'll accept any opinions. I'll accept practical, level-headed views. And if you do have a slightly more hardline view, I'll listen to that, provided it is not so callous that it is dehumanizing of these people. Because what we are seeing is a humanitarian crisis, and it's got nothing to do with being a loony left. It's to do with being a human being. And you'd have to be a pretty ruthless, cold bastard if you couldn't see that this is a crisis. And in the end of the day, can you really blame these people for trying to get a better life? If you were in their shoes, you would be doing exactly the same thing. I mean, let's face it, if Britain was in a state of civil war, or France, or Italy, or any other developed European country, if we were in a state of civil war, we would see a refugee crisis, and people would try to flee out of this country. So what these people are doing is entirely a human instinct. There's no easy answers, but maybe tougher penalties for the people traffickers, more pressure on the governments whereby this is where the people are coming from to take care of their citizens. And I don't believe they're doing anywhere near enough at present. So it has to work from both sides. and also more of a collective European effort rather than just leaving it all down to Italy and Malta. Um, there's no easy answers. Let me know your thoughts, but please keep this humane. I'm not saying be overly sensitive. I can understand pragmatism, but please, you know, keep in mind that today 650 to 700 men, women, and children have perished. This is a humanitarian crisis.